Hey there everyone, and welcome to Bill's Retro Gaming Show. So, now that Arcade1up has announced that their next machine is going to be Marvel vs. Capcom 2, that got me to thinking, what could come next from them now that they've been able to actually get that game to play on their hardware? Now, of course, what I'm talking about here is the fact that Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is based on Sega's Naomi hardware, which, for a lot of you old schoolers, remember the Dreamcast was kind of based on that hardware as well, and it tends to be a little bit on the tricky side to emulate. So it requires a little more processing power, some different things to just get those games to run properly. But with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, they've now been able to accomplish that. So what other games that ran on the Naomi hardware could be in Arcade1up's future? Well, I've compiled kind of a wish list, and these are just some of the ones that I think would be fantastic if Arcade1up could get them on a machine at some point. This is by no means all of them. I know some of you are going to say, what about this game? What about that game? Listen, this could be a 3-hour video going over all of the games that were, put out for Naomi. I don't want to do that. I just want to focus on some of the ones that I think people would really be interested in. And of course, if this is your first time checking out the channel, be sure to hit that subscription button, click the notification bell if you want to be notified every time I put up a new video, give this one a thumbs up, and leave a comment below if you want to be part of the conversation. So we are going to dive in and take a look at what games I would love to see Arcade1up come up with next, right after this. Alright, so like I mentioned at the start, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is based on Sega's Naomi hardware. Naomi was released in 1998 as a follow-up for Sega's Model 3. It does share a lot in common with the home console Dreamcast, although the arcade version did have slightly better CPU, slightly better graphics, and different memory configurations. So, a lot of games were released in the arcade for the Naomi system, and a lot of them did wind up getting ported over to the Dreamcast. But, now with Marvel vs. Capcom 2 being released, what other games could Arcade1up possibly get their hands on to put into different machines? Let's dive right in and find out. Alright, so we have just had Marvel vs. Capcom 2 announced, and we know everybody loves their crossover fighters. So why not start with a biggie like Capcom vs. SNK? Now, Capcom vs. SNK, of course, is a crossover fighter that combines fighters from Capcom and SNK, just like the name says. You got, your Street Fighter, your Darkstalkers on the Capcom side. You've got King of Fighters. You've got Samurai Shodown, Last Blade. All those kind of characters on the SNK side fighting against each other. There were 3 games released for the Naomi hardware in this line. You had Capcom vs. SNK Millennium Fight 2000. You had Capcom vs. SNK Millennium Fight Pro and Capcom vs. SNK 2 Millennium Fight 2001. They could obviously release all 3 fighters onto one machine, and I think people would just go crazy. I know a lot of people have wanted to see a Capcom vs. SNK. Now, again, there's licensing issues involved in here. We know they have Capcom. Could they get SNK? Well, there were rumors that SNK was in the works, that possibly a King of Fighters arcade machine was going to come out from them. We have not seen that happen yet, but maybe there's a relationship that's already started with them that could bring this one to fruition. As a matter of fact, in a recent interview, John D. of Arcade1up said that when he worked at Capcom, he actually worked very closely with SNK and would love to see the return of Capcom vs. SNK 2, even going as far as putting out the hashtag #FreeCVS2. So, hopefully we will see this one come about sometime in the near future. So while we're on the subject of Capcom Naomi games, and specifically Capcom Fighters, how about this one? This is Power Stone. Power Stone is definitely, I think, remembered more for the Dreamcast than it is for the arcades. But, it's a very interesting fighting mechanic with the ability to just run around the screen like this instead of just that pseudo 3D, 2D fighting battle that we've seen from other arcade fighters. I know it's definitely finally remembered, and I think people would love to see this added to an arcade machine. Now, they did have Power Stone and Power Stone 2 were both Naomi games, so they could certainly be added. And I could see these maybe being part of a new Capcom legacy, maybe with Capcom vs. SNK as the marquee title, but throw on Power Stone and Power Stone 2 to go with it as well. Alright, so as long as we are on the subject of a potential upgraded Capcom legacy, and let's be honest, we know they're going to keep releasing these year after year, well, how about this one? This is Giga Wing 2. Now, the latest Capcom legacy did include the original Giga Wing, so to add Giga Wing 2 to an updated version, I think would be fantastic. And since this is a Naomi-based game, well, you know, why not? Another vertical scrolling shooter, kind of break up the monotony of all the fighters from time to time. And yeah, I think this would be a hell of a lot of fun to see on a Capcom Legacy machine if they can pull it off. Alright, so this is another game that people have been clamoring for a while, and of course this is Crazy Taxi. Crazy Taxi is a driving game in the arcades. It was did come with a steering wheel. You had your gas and brake, you had your gear shift on it, so this could definitely be done in a driver's cab. I'm just not sure what other games they would pair with it. Would they make a Crazy Taxi arcade cab and then just pair a bunch of other games with it, or would they add this to one that maybe they already have planned, possibly a Daytona USA? Now, a lot of people have been talking about Daytona USA being potentially the next driver cab from Arcade1up. Could they add Crazy Taxi as one of the extra games to it? I'd be okay with that. I mean, I think a lot of people would love to see a Crazy Taxi themed arcade, but I think if it was just part of a driver cab from them, I think people might be okay with that. So yeah, definitely add this one to the list because I think people would love to see Crazy Taxi. And again, now that we know they can do Naomi, there's certainly no reason that they can't do this game at some point. Alright, continuing with Sega, but moving on from a driver to a shooter, this is one that, again, people have been just dying, pun intended, to see come up. And this is House of the Dead 2. So, again, now that we know that they can do Naomi games, and we know that they are very interested in doing shooter cabs, why not do a House of the Dead 2? Now, again, I'm not sure what other games they could potentially add to this. I know there are other House of the Dead. Certainly House of the Dead 1 could be included because the hardware requirements for that are not as strong as they are for 2. But, you know, again, now that they can handle Naomi, House of the Dead 2 is definitely on the table as one that they could produce at some point in the future. Alright, I'm going to end this off with another fighter series, and this is the Guilty Gear fighting series. Now, on the Naomi hardware, they had Guilty Gear X, they had Guilty Gear XX, or Double X, Guilty Gear Double X Reload, Guilty Gear Double X Accent Core, and Guilty Gear Double X Slash. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you had 5 potential games that could be added. Now, again, I'm not sure what else they could potentially put with this because these games were developed by Arc System Works and published by Sammy Studios. So this would be a new license, I believe, for Arcade1up if they could pull it off. But Guilty Gear is just another one of those fighter franchises that I think people really, really love and would love to see in an arcade unit from Arcade1up. So if they could pull this off, if they could get the licensing, I think it would be fantastic. Now, I'm sure there are other games that could be added to this. But hey, even in terms of Guilty Gear, just these 5, I think would definitely work for them. Alright, so there you have it. Those are my picks for Naomi arcade machines that I would love to see Arcade1up handle at some point in the future. Now, some of these I think are very doable. Some of the Capcom games, possibly some of the Sega games, would love to see Crazy Taxi on a machine, even if it's just an extra driver on another driver cab like Daytona USA. Some of them, I don't know, like the Guilty Gear games, that may be a little bit out there, but again, in terms of fighter games, I think people would love to see those. But, hey, let me know what you guys think in the comments. What do you think of my list? Which ones do you like? Which ones could you care less about? Are there some that I missed that you would love to see show up on an arcade machine from Arcade1up in the future? I was going to add Virtua Fighter 4, but then I realized, just so you guys know, Virtua Fighter 4 was actually Naomi 2, so I don't know that they're there yet for a Virtua Fighter 4. That's not to say that they couldn't do a Virtua Fighter cab at some point in the future. I just don't know if 4 would be one of them. But that's going to do it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, leave your comments below. Let me know what you think of my list. Let me know which ones I missed that you would love to see, all right? And that's going to do it, and I will see you guys again in the future. Have a great day.